things up this morning talking about Islam, which is a bit of a challenge. If you've been following the headlines around the world and all of the violence and crazy things that are happening in the Middle East and North Africa, well, it seems like change and evolution does not come easily in the world of Islam. And that hasn't always been the case. In fact, a good argument can be made that Islam went through its own version of the Enlightenment long before our Western world did. And the problem is that they went through this phase of amazing and enormous scientific and literary and artistic and architectural achievement, and then they somehow managed to slip back into the Dark Ages. We owe much to Islam because in many ways we can say that Islam actually helped to save our Western civilization. The Roman Empire crumbled. And when that happened, the so-called barbarian hordes came flooding in, and they destroyed and they burned the major centers of civilization in the Roman Empire. They burned and destroyed the libraries and all of the cultural achievements. They wiped out the record of all of the major achievements of Greek philosophy and science and math and things like that. But the world of Islam was isolated from all of that. They weren't involved in that atrocity, and so they were actually in a position to rescue and preserve many of the great works of science and math that had been given to the world by the Greeks that had been destroyed in the Roman world, and they actually went ahead and improved on those ideas. Those of you who have traveled Europe, those of you who have been fortunate enough to travel Europe, I haven't been able to do that yet, but if you've seen the great cathedrals and the architecture of Renaissance Europe, that became possible only after advanced geometry and math was recovered through trade and the exchange of ideas with the Islamic world. They couldn't make those cathedrals hardly stand until they finally got the geometry and math to do the architecture right. So the golden age of Islam, and all of this happened, was from the 8th through the 13th century. And then the Islamic world experienced its own barbarian invasion in the form of Genghis Khan. You might have heard of him. And they destroyed the centers of Islamic culture and knowledge. And then Islam in the 13th century descends into their own form of the Dark Ages. Chaos, crisis, everything is decentralized, and in the face of that kind of chaos, guess what took hold? Fundamentalism. That's how it works. When things fall apart, things are ripe for fundamentalism to take hold. Free thinking is discouraged. Conformity is encouraged. Everyone is expected to conform to what the religious authorities decreed based on their interpretation of the Quran and the Hadith. Now that's the version of Islam that is making all of the headlines today. When you hear about this little outfit called, it's called ISIS or ISIL or just the Islamic State, you hear about the things that they're doing now. When they invade a country, what's the first thing they do? They destroy the libraries. They burn the cultural achievements of those countries. They wipe out their architecture and archaeology. They've taken a page from the playbook of those barbarian hordes that destroyed first the Roman Empire and then came in and destroyed what the Islamic Golden Age had managed to preserve for the rest of us. They're doing the same darn thing. It's amazing. So ISIL is destroying the centers of knowledge. We've all heard of Boko Haram in North Africa, right? They're the ones that go in and kidnap schoolgirls. The name Boko Haram literally means Western education is a sin. Okay? The other group that we hear about all the time is the Taliban. Guess what their primary targets are? Education. The only thing that young people study, or are allowed to study under the Taliban, is the Quran, and girls, half or better than half of the population, get no education whatsoever. So we see all of this happening again. And I can tell you that's not a formula for evolution. We're calling this evolving religion. That is not a formula for evolution. That's a roadmap back to the Dark Ages, and it seems that that's what those groups want. Okay, so let's take a breath. And remember that there are 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. Okay? Fortunately, the vast majority of the Muslims in the world are not at all supportive of ISIS and Boko Haram and Taliban and the rest of these outfits. But unfortunately, a lot of these people live in countries in the Middle East and in North Africa where blasphemy, heresy, and apostasy are crimes, and sometimes they're punishable by death in these countries. There's not much they can do to speak out against the things that they disagree with. They may not support what's going on in the name of Islam, but they're not free to speak out or change their faith. That's what apostasy means, by the way, changing or abandoning your religion. In 13 Muslim majority countries, apostasy in this day and age is punishable by death. 14 out of 20 Muslim majority countries make blasphemy a crime of some sort, sometimes punishable by death. Not a favorable environment for change, or evolution, or reform. So in such a repressive environment, where are the new ideas going to come from? Who's going to be able to speak freely in support of reform? Well, there are plenty of non-Muslims in the West who have suggestions about reform, but you know what? That won't cut it. Because you know the old saying, change must come from within. People talking about change who are not part of that culture, who are not Muslim, it's going to be tough to listen to. It has to come from within. And it's happening. It's happening. Oh yes it is, but the stakes are high because speaking out for reform in some places can get you killed. Since February of this year, 3 bloggers in Bangladesh have been murdered by Islamic radicals for criticizing Islam and being too secular. They want government and religion to be separated, but the fundamentalists won't have it. And just last week, a 4th blogger was fled the country. She had some help from people in the USA, but the same killers were threatening her life. So here they are. These are the 3 that were murdered. And then we have this next one here, Taslima, who is now safe in the United States with a little help from her friends. Here's someone else you should know about. Put on the next one here. That is Raif Badawi. Have you heard of him?
No.
Lives in Saudi Arabia. He's been sentenced to 10 years in prison and 1,000 lashes because he wrote things about Islam that the religious authorities there considered to be blasphemy. Now so far, he's been given 50 of his 1,000 lashes. They do it in public, okay, out in front of a mosque where people, the public, can gather around and cheer on the carnage. One reporter who was there talking about what was happening described it, and I think very accurately said it was a form of pornography, the way people were treating it, and they're watching this happening. And think about it. We're no better in this country because hangings used to be public and lynchings and people used to come around and have picnics and things. It's a form of pornography. So, all of these people here, their profiles in courage. They are profiles in courage. They're willing to die for the kind of rights that many people in this country take for granted. This country offers the best opportunity, I think, for the ideas of reform and progress within Islam to take hold and make some headway. And of course, we owe it all to the First Amendment, right? The First Amendment, what was the daily word today? Free, right? Gives us the freedom to advance new ideas, to speak and think freely, to practice whatever religion we want to or none at all, to be able to speak to critique a religion. If they're doing something in the public square that we think is dangerous or infringes on our own rights, we have that right in this country. It's a precious, precious thing. We can practice any religion we see fit as long as it doesn't infringe on the rights of another person or lead to a breach of the peace. There's a concept in this country called pluralism that makes all of that possible. Here's a definition of pluralism that I like. Pluralism is the idea that my religion is good for me, and your religion may turn out to be as good for you as mine is for me. So pluralism is the concept that there are multiple loci of truth and salvation among the religions. Now, pluralism does not imply that all religions are the same or that all religions are equal, but it does recognize the possibility that my way is not the only way and that my religion is not necessarily superior to yours. That pretty well sets it out. That's from Reverend Jim Burklow. He's with the Center for Progressive Christianity, and we spent quite a bit of time talking about the progressive Christianity movement a couple of weeks ago when we did Evolving Christianity. A very important part of that definition that I want to stress is the part that says that pluralism does not imply that all religions are the same or that all religions are equal. We say one God, many paths, but we're not suggesting that all paths must be recognized as valid. And hear me when I say that. An Islamic extremist may believe that martyrdom is a path to God, and they do. A Muslim extremist will tell you martyrdom is a path to God. We do not have to honor and validate or accept that path just because they claim it to be a path. Every religion has a shadow side. That's just a plain fact of human existence. Every religion has violent extremists. We do not have to accept or validate that. On the other hand, how many people do you know of, how many people do you hear from who lump all of Islam into one big basket called extremist, right? Call every person who identifies as Muslim, you're a terrorist, you're an extremist, you're a radical, you're a jihadist, you're an Islamist, whatever. Lumps them all into that category, and then they just reject any expression of the Islamic faith. That's a big problem that we have in this country. That's a big problem. All that does is drives moderate people over to the extreme side. The moderate people say, you don't accept me, where are they going to go? It drives the moderates to the extreme side. But there's another problem as well, and there's the opposite extreme, where any kind of criticism of the ideas of Islam, if you criticize an idea or a concept in the Quran, if you are critical of the actions of Muhammad as depicted in the Quran or the Hadith, if you say anything about that, you're called a bigot or an Islamophobe. And that plays right into the hands of the extremists. We turn into apologists for the extremists, and we end up stifling the voices of the reformers, some of whom are dying to get their message across, which is calling for reform. And of course, if you're calling for reform, you are necessarily being critical of some of the ideas of Islam. If you can't be critical, and I don't mean this in a mean-spirited way, I mean if you can't be critical, if you can't speak out and say this is a problem without being labeled a bigot or an Islamophobe, that's a big problem too. So we've got those two issues in this country that we need to come to terms with. We have to be able to deal with. So, what can we do? What can we do to support the voices from within Islam who are advocating for a more modern interpretation of the Quran? What can we do to support those people who believe that jihad is an internal spiritual struggle rather than external warfare and subjugation? And believe me, you talk to You talk to the vast majority of Muslims in this country and talk to them about jihad, and they will tell you that jihad is the inner spiritual struggle, and they will tell you that jihad is not one of the foundational teachings of Islam. There are 5 pillars of Islam. I don't have time to get into them this morning. Jihad is not one of them. They will tell you that for them it is an internal spiritual struggle. It's the same thing we all go through every day, is this spiritual struggle, right? To spiritualize our lives. How can we be allies to those who want their countries to abolish the crimes of apostasy, blasphemy, and heresy? Well, first, I think it helps to remember the Christian Bible. The Christian Bible was once interpreted as advocating and sometimes even requiring genocide, ethnic cleansing, slavery, and the subjugation of women. Apostasy, blasphemy, heresy were all punishable by death in Christian culture. If you refused to convert, you were burned at the stake, or worse. It's all changed, hasn't it?
Yes.
It's all changed. And that's the good news. Anything can change. Anything can change, as long as people are willing to change what? The way they think. As long as we're willing to change the way we think, anything can change. Change begins at the level of consciousness, and it doesn't have to be anything flashy or exotic. Just a slight shift in the way we think about these things. Unity has a definition of prayer. Was one of the things that really got me hooked on the Unity movement, because they talk about prayer and they say that prayer changes one thing, and one thing only: my own consciousness. That's what I have to work on. And so from that standpoint, I look at what's going on in the world and I affirm that I am open to new ideas. I seek out and I listen to the voices of reform within Islam. I want to hear what these people are saying. I look for opportunities to advance and support those ideas so they will get out there into the larger world and make a difference. And here's what sometimes happens. See if I got this slide up here. Yep. June 2nd, 2015. House Resolution 290 in the U.S. Congress. Now, this is a resolution that was introduced which calls for the repeal of blasphemy laws worldwide. Now, I can hear the naysayers out there and the cynics, right? Oh, it's just a resolution. It doesn't have any binding effect, and it probably won't pass, you know, all that stuff. Don't you think that kind of misses the point? This is an idea, and it's an idea that has now been advanced. It's out in the public domain. People are aware of this now. They're aware of the fact that that the United States government is putting forth a resolution saying get rid of the blasphemy laws, and that includes heresy laws, apostasy laws. Get rid of them. Their time has come and gone, if there ever was a time, but definitely gone now. And then just last Tuesday and Wednesday, just this last week, they held congressional briefings about violence and persecution being faced by bloggers in Bangladesh and other places around the world. It starts at the level of consciousness. And a big part of that is education. That's what's going on now. Okay, what about that fella in Saudi Arabia, Raif Badawi? What can be done about that? Oh, we don't want to upset the Saudis now, do we? Because they got all that oil. Oh, and we need we need them for military bases and all that stuff, right? Yeah, so much for values, so much for freedom, right? But there has been some action. Just this last March, a bipartisan group of around 60 congressmen sent this letter to the king of Saudi Arabia demanding Badawi's release. In January, our State Department requested, in diplomatic language, you can't really demand stuff. They requested that the punishment be rescinded, that the case be reviewed. And a lot of people, including me, think they could have taken a stronger stance, but you know what? At least they've spoken out. They made the request, and of course, in response, who did the Saudis condemn? The people making the request. Don't interfere with our internal business. And then the Saudi, whatever it is, Supreme Court upheld the sentence, affirmed it, and upheld the sentence. And this is interesting because while that was going on, this next one, while that was going on, Saudi Arabia hosts UN-backed Human Rights Summit on combating religious discrimination. I'm not making this stuff, I kid you not, I am not making this stuff up. So if you think that this is easy, if you think that this is not a tangled mess out there that is trying to be unraveled, I mean, it's amazing sometimes, but you have to look. You have to dig a little bit to see that people are speaking out, that inroads are being made, that the ideas are getting out there, that more and more people are being educated, and that is what is going to make the reform and the evolution possible. We can't control these things. I mean, it's a crazy world sometimes, isn't it? We can't control these things, but we can be aware. We can educate ourselves so that when we're among people who are talking about these things, we can bring this up, spread the word a little bit, and we can take the action that we can. So if we have a congressperson or a senator or whoever who was part of signing that letter, send them a note of thanks. Whatever it takes to let them know that this is the kind of action that we need to support, to persuade, without a lot of gunfire, right? To persuade people in the world to begin to do away with these laws, these blasphemy laws, and to let free speech get these ideas out there. Thank them, persuade them, send a letter. Let our voices be heard so that others will know that we stand with those who are risking their lives to bring about moderation and reform within Islam and other places. Because, after all, right, unity, that's the name, right? Unity. All right. Well, next weekend is our annual retreat, and we'll be up at Lake Tahoe, but I want to encourage you all to come next Sunday and listen to Reverend Rick Reich, who's going to be here to talk about the meaning of life, and that should be a very interesting topic. And so I will see you again in a couple of weeks. For those of you who are going to Tahoe, we will see you up there. Thank you.